Joining us now for Word Brief is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi Akinsanya. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Reuben. Good morning, Ayo. Welcome back. Good morning,
Thanks.
Rufai. You know, I always say when you, Rufai, or even Dr. Reuben say my name, it just makes me feel so special. It just has a special ring when you guys say Adefemi. I just love it. I do. Let me tell you what's going on around the world today. And of course, we'll start in the United States with what we're seeing with Donald Trump. There has been very important news overnight into this morning, that being that Donald Trump has been charged in a superseding indictment in this election interference case. We will all remember that last August, former President Donald Trump pled not guilty to charges relating to him facilitating some form of criminal enterprise that sought to keep him in power and manipulate the riots that we saw in January 6th. Last year, he did plead not guilty to that. And then last month, we'll also remember that the US Supreme Court, in a huge decision, decided that Trump and anyone in that type of position would be immune from prosecution for official acts committed while in office. So what we are seeing with the refiling of these charges, of these 5 original charges, is the prosecutor taking into account what the Supreme Court has decided, but also insisting that it does believe that these alleged offenses perpetuated by former President Donald Trump will again have to be refiled, which is exactly what we're seeing in this indictment. And it'll be very interesting to see what the outcome will be, whether or not this change of course, taking into account what the Supreme Court has decided, will have any real material bearing on the outcome. Another point to mention is that within these charges that we are looking at, he is again accused of using the Department of Justice in order to conduct these crimes. And again, what the Supreme Court decision has talked about, what these new indictments also want to make clear, is that there's a bit of a separation where they understand that the functions of the Department of Justice were official and should be separate from this type of indictment here. So it is a little back and forthy. I can imagine that this is not something that any political candidate, much especially a presidential candidate, would want on their record going into the approaching somewhat the final straight of campaigning as he tries to get back into office. But with Donald Trump, as we've been seeing him be able to not skate by his legal issues or convictions, but perhaps not have them be quite a hindrance that perhaps they would be for any other candidate. So it will be very interesting to hear how Donald Trump responds to this new indictment. We can imagine that he will try his hardest to tether onto the strings of the Supreme Court, especially with the fact that they've made clear that he will be immune for any official acts that he constructed while he was in office. But it does seem as though what the special prosecutor in this instance is trying to do is trying to get Trump on these alleged crimes that he committed as a candidate rather than not as the president. So perhaps a little bit of a loophole trying to get around what we're seeing happening at the state of US politics as it stands. But also staying with US politics, I did want to talk to you about some data out of the country looking at a huge upturn in voter registration. There has been in different demographic groups, from young black women to Latino women, and all across the board, there's been a huge boost. But the biggest boost that we've been seeing in voter registration in this US presidential election has been from young black women. In fact, we've seen, according to this information that we're getting via CBS and of course different Turnitin data households, is that they're saying that young black women's registration upturn has gone up as high as 175.8%. That is massive. I don't think that I can exaggerate how huge a number that is. Of course, it's looking at a period within early to mid-July, and we're only just seeing the data coming out now, but this is major. Also, it will be interesting to see which political candidate will be able to jump off the back of this surge in numbers. Staying with black women, though, in addition to young black women having that huge number, black women of slightly older ages, they are seeing an increase of some 150%. I think the specific numbers were 149.7%. Again, 150% jump in anything, especially when we're looking at voter turnout, voter registration, my apologies, is colossal. Again, could we say that right off the bat that this is something that the Democratic Party are going to be able to take advantage of? Are we seeing young black women and older black women come together to register to vote because they want to throw their weight behind Kamala Harris? Of course, Kamala Harris being a half black candidate doesn't mean that every single black person in the United States who's registered to vote will vote for her. But it is quite interesting to see this shift in voter registration, the fact that many people are taking this election cycle very seriously. Perhaps it will be interesting to continue to see what the registration numbers will look like as we get closer and closer to elections. Usually in any type of presidential election, elections of this type of scale, there is always going to be a push of candidates making sure that people are registering to vote. We saw the same with Barack Obama, a huge campaign in making sure that people got out to vote and registered to vote. And so in this instance, perhaps it's not so much of a monumental update that people are registering to vote, but at this scale, in this number, and looking at these specific demographics, it is very interesting. And I can imagine that the Democratic Party will be happy to look at this type of data for now. Moving on now from the United States, shall we move over to Australia? Australia, as we know, has a huge population, but it also has a huge international student population. But what we're seeing is that the government in Australia, they want to bring their international student population back down to pre-pandemic levels. They have been struggling under the weight of this huge influx of people, which has caused rents and properties to skyrocket. So in a bid to perhaps bring down that pressure while more homes are being built, they are trying to reduce their numbers of new enrollments. So what we're seeing now, that from 2025 going forward, we will see that numbers will be limited for international students to 270,000 students for 2025. Now, this is also quite interesting when you think of the fact that Australia this year will host 700,000 students just this year alone for international students, according to the latest bit of government figures that we saw out in early 2024. So if we're saying that currently Australia has more than 700,000 international students, but in less than a year they want to bring that number down to 270,000, this is obviously going to create a huge blowback for not only the international population of students in the country, but also for the marketization of education. Many universities have come out and saying that they're being made to be a scapegoat, and this decision is going to hurt them in the back pocket because there is a financial ramification and consequence for these international students paying international fees, which naturally will be far higher than what home students are paying. Just to take a quicker look at those numbers. For example, international education in Australia was worth $36.4 billion. That is major, especially when you look at the money makers in Australia. It means that international education is the fourth biggest earner in the country. So to reduce the population is definitely going to have a knock-on effect on that situation. And that's why we're seeing that these proposed cuts will cost the Australian economy some $4.1 billion in losses, and also result into the loss of jobs. Some 22,000 jobs will be lost, it's projected, in 2025. So it is quite a considerable drop. And then lastly, looking at the African continent, we know that Nigeria has now become the first country to receive Mpox vaccines. They've received them from the United States. It's 10,000 doses of a vaccine to treat Mpox in the country. And this is, of course, as a result of Nigeria's proactiveness, their readiness to secure as many vaccines before even this issue of Mpox was declared a health emergency by the World Health Organization. And you can see that Nigeria has, in this instance, definitely taken the initiative to protect its populations. Of course, the numbers in Nigeria, though they are prevalent and in number, they aren't as high as we're seeing in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which are yet to secure any vaccines just yet, especially not to the scale. We know that in the Democratic Republic of Congo, their cases have reached 18,000 suspected cases and more than 600 deaths. That's obviously not the case in Nigeria, but it should be, can and should be commended that Nigeria has taken the proactivity to protect its populations. So back to you in the studio, there are a lot to discuss here. Voter registration upturns in the United States, Donald Trump and his back and forth with what we're seeing in terms of him being charged in this superseding indictment, and then also looking at Australia, the international community of international students dwindling, and then lastly, Nigeria being able to secure 10,000 vaccines to target Mpox. Over to you in the studio.
A couple of things. I'm excited about the fact that black women are coming out and registering en masse in America. I mean, that speaks volumes about the electoral process. I think Trump has triggered a base he doesn't want to deal with, and that's a lot of the black folks. And also, I think added to that story is the fact that Kamala Harris has also said she's going to be doing a sit-down with the CNN very soon, probably on Friday, with her running mate. Let's see how that pans out. But I don't want her to limit it to CNN alone. By extension, she should also go to Fox News, Breitbart, RSB, Newsmax, Q&A, and other right-wing channels. Even probably let her have a sit-down with Candace Owen and other right-wing people so that they can see across board. She should pretty much adopt the Buttigieg style that he normally goes to right-wing media and argues his case out positively. Also, there was a story that came out of America that was talking about the fact from a Wharton Business School model that says Trump's proposal for the economy will add about 4 to 6 trillion to the deficit, and Kamala's plan will add about 1 to 2 trillion to the deficit over a period of time. So there are some stats there coming out. Also, as regards America donating Mpox vaccine to Nigeria, that's quite very good. But the question I'd like to ask us is, what about the giant strides we made during COVID? Is it that we cannot produce vaccines any longer in Nigeria? At some point in this country, we had production of vaccines. So what happened to all of that? What happened to our medical system? How can we improve upon all of that? I'll yield the floor now.
All right, so first of all, with Trump and superseding indictment, he has come out to say that it is resurrecting a witch hunt and it should be thrown out. It has no merit, of course. I don't think anyone expected him to say any different. But the truth is, we'll see to what extent this would impact his campaign. And of course, we know that if he does win the election in November, he most likely will ask for all those charges against him to be thrown out. So now more than ever, maybe it will make him more desperate and more eager and more determined to get to the White House by vote come November 5. But moving on to the poll or the numbers on black women, black voters. I think beyond the numbers going high is that would this automatically mean an increase in the number of people who would be supporting the Democratic Party in the elections? Now, another poll by KFF has stated that, yes, more about 50 to 60% of the black population in America identify as Democrats and are more likely to lean towards the Democratic Party. However, some of them are a bit skeptical about the handling of the inflation numbers by the Democratic Party, especially under President Joe Biden. This poll was done when he was still in the race. I don't think an updated poll has been done now that Kamala Harris is in. But with the criticism that she hasn't been able to speak, it was early July, that since that's why it's critical for her to be able to speak about her economic plans for the United States of America. It's not going to be just about popularity, the fact that people see hope and something different in her. She must be able to demonstrate to the American people, especially these numbers that the Democrats can take advantage of, that she will look after their interests. In fairness to the Democratic Party, despite the fact that they felt that inflation wasn't properly managed under the Biden administration, they still feel that the Democrats would still look out for their interests, over 60-70% respondents, than the Republicans. So, to be fair, or to be honest, the Democrats can leverage these numbers that have come out to their advantage come the elections. But again, it's still a battleground in terms of the Republicans fighting for the votes of black and ethnic minority people in the United States of America.
Okay, on vaccines, with regard to Mpox, gives us an opportunity to praise the Nigerian authorities at the National Control Disease Disease Control Agency, NCDC. The reason Nigeria is the first country to get this donation is because we were told that the Nigerian authorities acted proactively. 40 cases of Mpox reported in Nigeria in 19 states. Initially, it was reported 13 states, now 19 states. But the NCDC authorities acted proactively, and so they've been given this advantage. WHO had already decided that Mpox is, an international health emergency, of urgent concern. And having done that, we have the WHO has what is called EUL, some emergency listing for countries that are most affected. Now, the countries that are most affected in Africa are Burundi, Kenya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where you have the Class 2, the Class 1B category. But what we have in Nigeria is the Class 1B category. But what we can say is that the Nigerian authorities should remain proactive. So they've done well in this regard, but of course, they have to address the situation. No deaths have been recorded in Nigeria yet. In Democratic Republic of Congo, you have had 615,000 cases, 18,000 deaths recorded. But we just talked to the NCDC to remain proactive. As for the United States, the indictment, the special counsel that has brought up this indictment against Donald Trump is a gentleman called Jack Smith. And he's simply saying, I still have this. But the question is, will the evidence, the fresh evidence that he will bring, be admissible? However, it is very clear that, to indict a presidential candidate in the middle of a presidential campaign can be an issue. It can affect his campaign. 2, the January 6th incident remains top of the banner in the U.S. Democratic elections going forward to November 5. But whether it will have an effect one way or the other, I think that is very difficult to determine at this point. As for Australia, look, the authorities are saying they are bringing a national planning level to address housing and migration issues. The key issue there is this, and it is as follows. The fact that the executive has gone ahead of the legislature. That decision to cap international students' admission in 2025 at 270,000 will still have to be determined by Senate. So that is the big issue in that story. There are exemptions, of course. Students coming from countries with which Australia has tuning arrangements, countries like the Pacific or the Timor-Leste. So there are specific exemptions. But Senate will still have to take that decision. They will lose money, perhaps, but the students that will be most affected are from China and India.
All right, a lot of money will be lost there, and I don't know how long they're going to sustain that. But thank you very much, Adefemi, for bringing us the World Brief this morning against the backdrop of very interesting sounds. I love that the bell went off when you were speaking, and also a few sounds, sights and sounds of London. See you again tomorrow.